sounds.
Wow. Hey, pura vida. Much love and respect to everybody tuned in. I hope you guys enjoyed the last video. I just wanted to continue where we left off in this part 12 of Nations of the World regarding the Chaldeans, descendants of Arphaxad, as you see here, and Ur, the land of Uriah, or Uriah land, or Ur of Chaldees, right? And how that related to Abraham, who supposedly came out of Chaldea, right? And I left it at showing you guys what does that have to do with Ireland, right? If you watch this video. So today we're going to continue from there. I had this great book that I found, years back. Wanted to go ahead and start reading it to you. And remember, we're going to dodge the hijack. Any hijack we see always. We pull out the babies out of everything. And we're going to get a couple chapters, at least the first 5 chapters of this book today. Remember, we know the hijack stories. So anybody trying to argue or debate this, they've never found the actual place. It's all conjecture. It's all opinions. It's not in Iraq. All right, we know the story. We know the fairy tales. You don't need to repeat the doctrine to us. We're trying to find the real locations, right? Make this more historical, not just stories, right? And places that we can never find, make it a mystery, right? It's not a mystery. That's my story, mystery, my story, right? And I mean in general. All right, so I hope you guys enjoy. Let's begin. All right, so now we're going to get into this book finally. And I say finally, not because of the last video, but because I've had this book for about 4 years. And I'm like, wow, how do I even get to this? People ain't ready for this. I wasn't even ready. I had to learn and study more. And how would this be Chaldea, Ireland, right? So this, as it says here, this book, Ireland, Ur of the Chaldees. Ireland, Ur of the Chaldees. How could that be? But I think we're at the point where we have a lot of overstanding right now. All right, shout out to Big Judah. Shout out to everybody connecting Ireland and the clans there, and the Scottish clans and British clans. This goes even before all that. This is like, we're going way back, right? We're going supposedly to ancient Babylon, Akkadians, Chaldeans, all right, Assyrians, all right? But we're going to talk about a real location, not a false narrative. Again, Ireland, Ur of the Chaldees by Anna Wilkes. This is from 1873. She did some really good research. Again, I've had this book for a while. I'm happy to be able to get to this book finally. We go right to chapter 1. I hope to be able to go ahead and read the whole book with you guys. It's very interesting. A lot of good chapters. And yeah, believe it, we can read 200 pages together, whether it takes us a couple episodes or in one episode. This is pre-recorded. It don't matter. We're going to try to pull out the babies and get some overstanding here. Could this be the real Chaldea in Ireland? Chapter 1, the extent of Chaldea. Its situation not in the east. It's not over there in the Middle East. Not in Iraq. I'm bringing before the reader's attention the extent of ancient Chaldea, in which was Ur. According to the best authorities, we do so in order to show that it was of such small dimensions as not to have contained the cities and kingdoms commonly supposed to have been within its area. and therefore that the district or country of Chaldea was not between the Tigris and Euphrates. All right, they're literally letting you know, like what we've been also saying before. You know, how could they get lost for 40 years in such a small place? And how could Chaldea be over there in Iraq between, you know, those rivers, modern day Tigris and Euphrates? It's too small to contain all those cities and kingdoms that are mentioned in these ancient texts and the Bible and everything. It's too small an area. They even haven't found all this stuff. All right. Perhaps the best authority that has appeared lately on this subject is Mr. Rawlinson, who has been quoted extensively in the notes to the new edition of the Bible and elsewhere. We give from his work a passage on Chaldea. It is obvious that only natural divisions of Chaldea proper are those made by the river courses. The principal tract must always have been that which intervenes between the two streams. This was anciently a district some 300 miles in length, varying from 20 to 100 miles in breadth, and perhaps averaging 50 miles, which must have thus have contained an area of about 15,000 square miles. The tract between the Euphrates and Arabia was at all times smaller than this, and in the most flourishing period of Chaldea must have fallen short of 10,000 square miles. You see that? So the way, just that one thing right there describing a 300 mile in length, you know, from 20 to 100 miles in breadth, and perhaps averaging 50 miles, that doesn't fit the area they saying Chaldea was at today. It doesn't fit there. It's a lot smaller than 15,000 square miles. You guys see that? It doesn't fit the descriptions of these ancient places. We never took into account the areas, how big they were really talking about when we talk about distances. When we talk about rivers, how really long are you really talking about? How far are you really talking about? Does that fit in today's Iraq, in today's modern, supposedly ancient Chaldea over there in Iraq? It doesn't. That's why they're letting you know right here. It says we have no evidence, they have no evidence that the natural division of Chaldea here indicated was ever employed in ancient times for political purposes. The division which appears to have been so employed was one into northern and southern Chaldea, the first extending from Hit to a little below Babylon, the second from Niffer to the shores of the Persian Gulf. In each of these districts, we have a sort of tetrarchy or special preeminence of 4 cities, such as appears to be indicated by the words, the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, Akkadian, Akkadia, Akkadia, Akkadians, right? Whoa, yeah. And Calneh in the land of Shinar, right? Shinar, which supposedly became Summer, right? And Sumerians, but that's for Sumerians, just a term for people who dwelt in Shinar or Summer. Doesn't mean a nation. The southern tetrarchy is composed of the 4 cities, Uria, Uri, remember Uri? Or the land of Ur, or the land of Uri, Uri land, or Hur, Huruk, Nippur, and Larsa, or Larancha, which are probably identified with the scriptural Ur of the Chaldees, Erech, Calneh, and Elazar. All right, those are those, he's saying. The northern consists of Babel or Babylon, Borsippa, Kuta, and Sipara, of which all except Borsippa are mentioned in scripture. Besides these cities, the country contained many others, as Chilmad, Durkuri Galsu, Ihi or Rahaba, Rubesi, Duran, Telhumba. It is not possible at present to locate with accuracy all these places. They haven't found any of these places. We may, however, in the more important instances, fix either certainly or with a very high degree of probability their position. Continuing, it says, Hur or Ur, the most important of the early capitals, was situated on the Euphrates, probably at no great distance from its mouth. It was probably the chief commercial emporium in the early times, as in the bilingual vocabularies, its ships are mentioned in connection with those of Ethiopia. All right, so which Ethiopia, right? The name is found to have attached to the extensive ruins now about 6 miles from the river, on its right bank, and nearly opposite its junction with the Shat el Hie, which are known by the name of Mur-Ger. or the bitument. Now the substance of all this is that Chaldea proper was divided by the river courses, or in other words, lay between the Tigris and Euphrates, anciently a district some 300 miles in length. Again, the letting you know this was at least 300 miles in length, about 15,000 square miles. It doesn't fit with they're saying it is today in Iraq. It's smaller than this, and perhaps averaging 50 miles in breadth, and that the other tract between the Euphrates and Arabia was 10,000 square miles or less than a third of the entire Chaldea, calculated to have had an extent of 23,000 square miles, falling short of Ireland by more than 9,000 square miles. Then Mr. Rawlinson, in the wake of those who have written upon the subject before him, goes on to tell us of the probable situation of Ur, or Hur, and that according to Sir H. Rawlinson, it was probably the chief commercial emporium in the early times. It is not to be wondered at that Mr. Rawlinson follows upon the beaten track of discovery in this quarter. It is far safer so to do than to search for truth in a new direction, which, however, is enticing and affording abundance to gratify the thinker, the archaeologist, and scholar. Handed down to us are etymologies of names of places, doubtful as the positions of those places. All right, doubtful. These etymologies they gave us. The word Shinar suggests what is given as the Hebrew of it, nothing more. Shin, two, and Nar, or are a river, two rivers. Shinar, two rivers. All right, that's the etymology. It doesn't mean a landmass over there in Iraq. It doesn't specify that. Chaldea is rendered the country or dry land of Chazdim, which word is no doubt derived from Chesed, son of Nahor, who gave his name to the city of Nahor in Aram Naharaim. All right, so that's the Chazdim or Kesedim. Nahor did have another son named Kesedim. Remember, they were trying to say it was Arphaxad's son in the last video. And when we look at biblical and Genesis, it actually says he was the son of Nahor. So even though all of those people are descendants of Arphaxad, so they're still right about the Chaldeans being, you know, the people of Arphaxad, because it's the same line. All right, so Nahor, again, he named the city Aram Naharaim. All right, the Chaldean city, Aram, between the rivers. In Syriac, Beth Narim has the same signification. The Greeks from the Hebrew, or Syriac, consequently compounded a word with the same meaning, Mesopotamia, or the country between rivers. The Arabs knew it by the name of the island, or Al-Jazire. All right, now just like Atlantis, right, between two oceans or two waters, the same thing. They're talking about the same place. All right, Babylon in Greek, and in Hebrew, Babel from Balal, to confound, which word is said to be contracted from Balbal, confusion. There are other etymologies, but the latter are the most probable and have the advantage of signifying exactly the state in which the question is involved at the present time, confounded and in confusion. We have given the above examples of ancient names of places because they are generally understood to mean the same thing: the country or land between rivers. The one exception seems to be the Arabic Al-Jazire, or the island. All right, an island. All right, isn't Ireland and the British Isles Islands, right? Isles Islands. Ireland is an island, right? Island. How these interpretations may be otherwise understood than they are intended, we will afterwards consider. At the present, it is obvious that our best scholars are undecided as to the correct meaning and geographical position of Shinar, Chaldea, Aram Naharaim, Mesopotamia, Al-Jazire, or even Babylon, right? Again, this is something very important to point out. They don't know. They can't tell you today with proof. You know, even though they say it was over there in Iraq, they can't prove it. They can't tell you geographical position of any of these places today. And it says, we have looked in vain through the notes to the new edition of the Bible and thought, as we believe most people would, before risking a conclusion to so important a question, that the great intellects engaged upon that work would have evolved something tangible from the many hypotheses that have been constructed in defense of a locality for these most important scripture places. All right, so in other words, we would assume, right, where he's saying we would believe, we would assume that they would have actually gave us something tangible to their hypotheses, to their theories, to where they're saying these locations are. They have no proof of it. They haven't really proven that at all. All right, we assume they did. We just believed them. The authorities for the new edition of the Bible have simply quoted from the best writers upon the subject. To Mr. Rawlinson, they owe a great deal, but he unfortunately has left the question much in the same way as he found it. This is what was to be expected, for all the misapprehension about the question has originated with the interpreters of the Bible making Shinar, Chaldea, Aram, Naharaim, Mesopotamia, and Babylon one place. They made all that one place. You see how they cramming everything into one place? Just like they say, you know, the Israelites got lost for 40 years in that small place over there. They can't really explain how, right? Because they keep cramming these people into these fake places that it's not even the right size and everything. And it says only because these words have a like meaning. Principally because the words have a like meaning. That's it. Kala is confounded by Rawlinson with Kalne. In Genesis 10, it is stated that the beginning of Nimrod's kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Kalne in the land of Shinar. But in verses 11 and 12 of the same chapter, it is given, out of that land went forth Ashur and buildeth Nineveh. All right, so it was actually Ashur, a descendant of Shem, right? And the progenitor of the Assyrians, remember from my last video? And the city Rehoboth and Calah and Resen, between Nineveh and Calah. Beside Calah and Calne, there is a Calno, quoted by some authors as the same place. There is nothing very strange in supposing Ashur to have been the builder of Calah. Calah and Calne were not the same place. Calah, it may be allowed, was in the district claimed for it by Rawlinson, but that Calne was not there. It is sufficient to know Ashur went out of a land called Shinar, of which Calne with Babel, Erech, and Akkad was the beginning. All right, the beginning. So they're literally telling us two different places. So Ashur left Akkad, Acadia? Ashur is described as having gone out of Shinar and built the cities of Nineveh, Rehoboth, Resen, and Calah. All right, so it was Ashur, not Nimrod. For the situations of these cities, there is ample evidence. The beginning of the kingdom of Nimrod should be understood as distinct from the building of Nineveh, Calah, and other cities in Assyria, attributed to Ashur. Right, it's different. It's not Nimrod. It was Ashur, a son of Shem. Interpreters of scripture, misled by often only a supposed meaning of the Bible names of places which they find in Chaldee, Hebrew, and Greek, and misled also by their anxiety to find all the beginnings of things in the East. All right, that was a big point he just made. Just because they're trying to fit their narratives, they're trying to put everything in the Middle East and Africa, right? And so because they're trying to do that, their anxiety, they're making up all these things and they're not really paying attention to what they're doing. All right, they have mistaken the testimony of the Aboriginal language of Europe. Oh, the what? An Aboriginal language of Europe. Now we're getting into something. What are we talking about? What are we talking about? In the countries over which it was spoken. That language admitted by philologists to have been before Greek and Latin and coexisting with Sanskrit. All right? The language that gave names to most of the mountains, rivers, the natural scenery of Europe, and bestowed on parts of Asia cognate words that endured yet almost unchanged. The Celtic. All right? This is where we're about to get deep, all right? The Celtic. What is the Celtic? Remember that the Celtic goes back to the Armoricon. If those interpreters had availed themselves of the light shed by the Celtic languages upon the pages of the Bible over which they labored, they would not have sanctioned the huddling together of so many countries and cities in Chaldea, so many places. They put it in one place and they told you it was right there in Iraq. They lied to you. A place not to be found even in name in the whole Hebrew Bible. It doesn't even exist in the Bible. You understand? They're making up terms, trying to make up nations. So they made up terms that didn't even exist in the Bible. If it is our duty to seek the best means of proof, it is necessary to divest ourselves of prejudice while thinking over the book that contains so many truths about our first state and our future life. All right, so we continue in the book Ireland, Ur of the Chaldees by Anna Wilkes from 1873. And we're in chapter 2 of the book. And it says, Remarks on the sons of Noah and their tongues. Where the habitation of Noah was after his descent of Ararat has not yet been discovered, all right? They don't know. So they can't tell you where it is, really. At any rate, satisfactorily, but we are informed it was a land in which he planted a vineyard, according with him being a husbandman. His sons, after living with him for a time in this uncertain locality, as uncertain as the eastern resting place of the ark, separated. Of the descendants of Japhet, the elder son, we are told they occupied the immense extent of land that stretches from Asia Minor, immediately south of the Caspian Sea, the river Oxus and the Ayamus and Atay Mountains, to the extreme east and north of Asia. Now look at this quote, this footnote right here. It says, why they may have gone over to America from this or some other point is a matter that does not come within the range of the present argument. Although it cannot be treated upon here, it is related to our subject. America, when they talk about Asia, the farthest east. We're continuing, you know, how Japhet's territories, right? It says, and westward over Asiatic and European Scythia, Scandinavia, Britain, Gaul, Italy, Greece, all the Mediterranean islands, and into Asia Minor again. By many, it is thought the west coast of Asia Minor, or Do Danim, bordering upon a Tarshish, which they include, with the island of Cyprus on its south, in the Japhetian chart. Shem's descendants are supposed to have inhabited all the land south of the Iamus and Atay Mountains, to the east and north as far as Japan, southward over the Pacific Islands, Hindustan, Persia, Syria, Assyria. All right, you hear all this? Even Hindustan, the Pacific Islands, Japan, Persia, Syria, Assyria, the country of Aram, and then with the exception of Dodanim and the supposed Tarshish, the remainder of Asia Minor, right? That was Shem's land. The descendants of Ham are assigned to Arabia and Africa. The names of the sons of the generations of Noah can be traced as having been peculiar to Western Europe before Christ, all right? So Ham, straight up Arabia and Africa, all right? The whole earth was one language and one of speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. All right, so again, they're quoting right now Genesis. Remember, we're not reading the Bible, but he's using it to correlate, all right, because he's going to get to a point. Of course, it must be concluded from this that the sons of Noah were of one language and one speech, and that they dwelt in Shinar, which country was in the west. For it is expressly stated they journeyed from the east. They came from the east, so that was in the west. You get what I'm saying? Just like corn, just like the Mandan legends, right, of them bringing corn with them on their easternly migration. So that means they were coming from the west, just like these ancient people were coming from the west. Since they were traveling east, they journeyed east. And what part of the west from Asia was Shinar? If it did not extend over all Europe, we will leave to the reader to determine from the facts as they are given in our subsequent pages, all right? He's going to give you the facts, and you're going to know basically what they mean, what west that was, all right? Just like when they're saying the Egyptians, right? They're saying that all their gods and all these people are Westerners. It's not just West Africa, all right? You got to go a little further. You're going to get to another part of Shem's land. You got to go a little more west. For the present, we safely assume that the sons of Noah spoke one language. What that language was may be a difficult question to answer correctly, but difficulty should not deter us from at least searching for it among parts that once made a whole, made one language before it affected others. Notwithstanding the arbitrary classification of languages, Philologists are becoming more aware of this fact. It is quite possible that time and observation will reward the independent searchers after truth and bring together, through them, so many, at least, elements of the matrix tongue spoken by the sons of Noah, and for a time their descendants, as will forever set at rest in solid foundation the materials of the primitive speech. We are aware of the gravity of such a task and that it requires volumes to do it justice, all right? Hey, one day we might gonna try to crack that code, right? If we devote a few suggestive pages to this subject, it is because they may be found necessary to the explanation of the text and of the service in discovering a European location of Shinar, a European location. The laws of language and the names of those laws were first discovered by the Greek philosophers and grammarians. Yet, as may be gathered from a passage in the Kratilos of Plato, that acute mind could not do more than suggest that the barbarians lent some of their words to the Greek. The idea of penetrating the relationship of languages probably never entered the head of Plato. It was reserved for the thinkers of this century to take the first step toward the classification of languages. The stupendous mass of speech used by man, it is at this hour as difficult a task to divide into distinct families as any that can be conceived. The Aryan, Semitic, the Indo-Chinese, the Malayo-Polynesian, the polysynthetic dialects of America, and other tongues have not at present yielded much toward the philosophy of language. But as far as researches have been conducted, the Aryan and the Semitic have contributed most. Under the Aryan are comprised the languages of India, Persia, Armenia, Greece, Italy, the Celtic, and Slavonic. All right? All those. Remember that Persian, that was Shem. The Semitic or Shemitic includes the languages of the Babylonians, the Syrians, the Jews, the Ethiopians, and the Arabs. All right? If we judge of the influence of these two classes of language upon political and literary history, we admit they include the most important of the earth. But inasmuch as it can only at present be conjectured what was the first and natural state of language, so is there much tendency to err, dividing it into classes. Thus the Sanskrit and Hebrew, the Celtic and Arabic are not only to be studied as Aryan and Semitic languages, but as languages that must have reciprocated many of their parts. All right, that's deep right there, letting you know. Two base ones are letting you know. 100 years ago, this would be considered visionary by scholars accustomed to look up Hebrew, Greek, and Latin glossaries for the radicals of various and dissimilar words, but their labor in that way was unproductive. They accepted as necessarily true what had been taught them, nor believed that there might be much darkness dispelled and some things important to the elucidation of language discovered in the histories of people and nations, in the records of their manners and customs in relation to present manners and customs, their names of places and things, remaining in modern languages, the wars of people and nations, their contacts, their associations, peace, admixture of race, their civilization, and by their monuments of civilization and decay. Man in his normal state had a vigorous language, uncircumscribed by rules. Max Muller, alluding to the Aryan and Semitic speech owing their origin to historical concentrations of speech wild and unabounded, says, in the eyes of the student of language, Sanskrit, Greek and Latin, Hebrew, Arabic, and Syriac are what a student of natural history would not hesitate to call monstra, unnatural, exceptional formations, which can never disclose to us the real character of language left to itself to follow out its own laws without let or hindrance. For that purpose, a study of the Chinese and the Turanian dialects, a study even of the jargons of Africa, Polynesia, Melanesia is far more instructive than the most minute analysis of Sanskrit and Hebrew. Although the historical concentrations by which was formed a wild, unbounded Aryan and Semitic speech, the languages of most parts of Asia and Europe cannot be written in detail, we may arrive at the almost certain conclusion that such a language became the basis of the Send, Doric, Old Slavonic, Latin, Gothic, Armenian, Lithuanian, perhaps Sanskrit, are all are varieties of one type, and perhaps no one of them can be considered as the original on which the others altogether formed. Who can say from what words grew in diverse dialects and languages? Alright, who's going to tell you that? Who's going to really know that? It is certain that the Sanskrit, even although approaching so near to a matrix language, has not preserved in many cases the primitive and organic forms of words to be found in Greek and Latin. This is held by many scholars. Max Muller gives us an example that word right there cannot be derived from the Sanskrit samas, because samas has lost the radical a, which Greek has preserved, the root being as, to be the termination mas, we. In the same way, the Greek cannot be called a language from which others were derived, for the Latin language has preserved some forms that are older than Greek. So we find contracted from is preserved by sunt. So I hope you guys are following along. It's pretty interesting what they're correlating here. I know it's a lot of information you might not understand, but it's very important understanding what they're saying here about languages and how these are not the original languages, even though Greek and Sanskrit is very old. They come from something else. Continues says here, Greek has dropped the radical s altogether, while Latin, like Sanskrit, has at least preserved the radical s and sunt equals santi. In older languages, and either may yet be in existence, those words that were used to signify the nearest necessity of human existence, such as the man, woman, father, mother, brother, sister, sky, soul, air, earth, water, bread, wine, strength, work, house, village, town, writing, gate, tower, king, queen, and words that may be said to contain the history of the world, and as they are nearly alike in sound and meaning in the languages above specified, and also in the Celtic. All right, Celtic with a footnote. It says under Celtic will be included as well as Irish, the Erse of Scotland, the Welsh, the Manx, the Cornish, and Armoric. Remember I was telling you the Armorican, Armoric, all right, Celtic. That's what they're talking about. Remember, it's about to get deep. Got to follow along. All right, I'm trying to understand too. We're learning together. The problem of the radical relationship of all languages may one day be solved, and the disciples of Raoul Mer, Ascoli, and Ewald no doubt be delighted, at any rate brought to a confession that the Aryan and Semitic speakers have preserved from the earliest times words that prove not only the divergence of speech from one speech, but the divergence of race from one race, and consequently from one locality. The relationship of the Aryan languages is evident. All right, so they give them some examples here: English, Sanskrit, Send, Greek, Latin, Gothic, Slav, Irish. Father, Pitar, Patar. Look at that. Send and Sanskrit, Patar. Pater. Look, Sanskrit and Latin, Pater. Gothic, Fadar or Patar, same. Slav, Pater. Pater, Pater. Irish, Ater, Pitar. Patar, father, Pater. Look, Latin, Pater, Ater, Patar, Pitar. It's the same. All right, that's a good example there. Mother, Matar, Matar, Mater, Mati, Mater. It's the same. Mater, Mater. Brother, Bratar, Bratar. Look in Sanskrit, your brother, Brata, Brate, Bropa, Brat, Brate. Look, it's all the same. You see? This is why they're saying it's very important to study philology, or the study of languages. Shout out to Kiowa. He's big on that. We got future videos on all this. Things like this, examples like this, we're going to talk about. But they're just letting you know this is an example where they're talking about here. Daughter, duhitar. Sanskrit, duhitar, data. Dea, duhita, dea, data. The above from Max Muller are only a few of the words used by the first of the Aryan stock. The lingua prisca of the first inhabitants of Italy was nothing more than a dialect of the primitive Celtic. You hear this? They're talking about Latin. It's just a primitive Celtic of the original lingua prisca. In course of time, this dialect received infusions of Greek, particularly Aeolic, through the adventurers from the Peloponnesus. The Greek itself, meantime, retain much of the ancient Celtic. All right, a lot of the Greek retain a lot of the ancient Celtic, upon which it undoubtedly grew as from one extensive root that spread itself everywhere over Europe. We make these remarks in order to point out that the Aryan languages, so-called, are in all probability ramifications of the original speech of Europe. And even if it were only possible that this is the case, the educated should turn their attention to the Celtic language. And while knowing their proof or disproof, the claims put in for its antiquity, we again turn to Max Muller, who interests us in the old household of the Aryans, that their words tell the story of their pastoral life, being a life of peace. The following table, principally taken from his comparative mythology, will sufficiently show. It is given because of the great authority of Max Muller. At the same time, it is to be regretted that he had not a better acquaintance with the Celtic language. Examples of words from which he gives in the paradigm, while other examples ready to his hand, and the equivalents of the very words he introduces for illustrations, are left out. We have taken the liberty to insert them. All right, so here's an example of what he was talking about, the table. So I guess, you got the Sanskrit, the San Greek, Italian, Teutonic, Lithuanian, Slav, and Celtic here. All right, some examples so you guys can see it. Pause it. You guys want to go through it. The last word in the list, goose, was rendered by Max Muller, Ganra, signed by him, Gaelic. But it should have been, as now inserted, Geeth, the same as the Irish for goose. The only difference is that Max Muller makes a goose a gander in Saxon, Gaelic, and Irish, and other cognate tongues. Ganra is gander. The table of words is, however, very valuable as a contribution towards a proof of a primitive oneness of the Aryan languages and people. And if the Semitic glossaries are carefully examined, it will be found that there is not such an estrangement between them and the Aryan as is commonly supposed. All right, he's saying even maybe the Hebrew, all right? So, what is the mother tongue? When we talk about Armorican, Armorucan, we give a few examples of words from the Chaldaic, Hebrew, and Irish. They, we hope, will be found sufficient to interest while explaining that these languages must have been radically the same. Those who haven't read through the list which still doubt this are respectfully asked to reconsider the question, divesting themselves as much as possible of preconception and the influences upon correct judgment that come of school. All right, so you got to empty your cup before you do that, so you can just take in this new info and verify it. Let them remember that the principles of language are not universally accepted, nor is this to be wondered at when we come to perceive that man, of his vanity, would systematize tongues, hundreds of which are not even in their alphabets understood by him. To the Hebraist, but slightly acquainted with the Celtic archaeology and tongues, we can promise, if he gives adequate attention to them, that he will be relieved from much of the idle nonsense diffused by most philologists and grammarians. We find Max Muller in the preface to his Chips from German workshop, telling us that the principles that must guide the student of the science of language are now firmly established. We wonder what those principles are, for Max Muller has not discovered them to us, nor to, as far as we know, any of the numerous learned societies with which he is connected, all right, secret societies. He's connected. Perhaps what he means by the principles that must guide the student of the science of language is the exercise of a student's own good judgment, above being reduced by the awe so often created in his breast while contemplating the stupendous learning, the contents of all lexicons, all words disposed by grammar and registered on mind, required to unbury and bring into light, out of the infinite of speech, its first laws and elements. There is much work left for the ambitious. All right, so before ending this chapter, the author shows the table he was talking about. He's going to show some English, Irish, Chaldean, and Hebrew words. So between the Irish, Chaldee, and the Hebrew, you see there's some comparisons. So Irish and Chaldean, cab, it's the same thing. Cab, Kadas in Hebrew, Kadas, sanctuary from the Irish root kad. And then it says here, Dal in Chaldean, Dak from Lak, the word Lak is derived, Lak, they serve in Lak. Maidin or morning, Maidin or Medina, Matin is probably from midnight, all right? And then you got Mace, Murph, Mahis, guardian angels, fairies, Macy, Messi, as strength, Meshi, guardian. Nos, custom, nos, Nessa, experience, nos. You got ode, music, Arabic, ada, Spanish, loud, aloud. And then you got run. All right, so these are some examples of what they're talking about. Study, learning, ug, aga, probably from the Irish ug there, is derived from the word outdoor, which means the same thing, to study. And we continue in the book, Ireland, or Ur of the Chaldees by Anna Wilkes, 1873. And we're in chapter 3. Shinar is Europe. All right, remember Shinar is literally the same as summer, or the land of Samaria, right? Samaria, Shinar is Europe. Chapter 3. The way being now, to our mind, clear of the principal objections urged in support of a radical difference between the Aryan and Semitic languages, it becomes our task to show how the people of Shem, Ham, and Japhet may be traced in prehistoric Europe, and to point out that Shinar is ascertainable to have been Europe and Chaldea with Ur in its western quarter, all right? Listen to this, this is deep right here, all right? As before stated, Shinar, or summer, right, according to scripture interpreters, is the country round about Babylon, the great plain or alluvial country, watered by the Tigris and Euphrates. Shinar, round about Babylon, is an unmeaning as a presumed Hebrew etymology of the name to river, and has no reference to the land it is supposed to signify. It is slightly different when we interpret arts Chazdim, the name for Chaldea, remember, or Kasdim, remember, Chazdim or Kasdim, as the country or dry land of Chazdim. Nearly the same may be said of Aram Naharam, which we are told means Aram, between the rivers, and also of Mesopotamia. And as to the meaning of Chaldea, we are left entirely in the dark. Neither Chaldee nor Hebrew lexicon nor the learning and ingenuity of men have thrown satisfactory light upon it. All right, so we, in our previous video, I mean, he's right. It goes back to Ur, Kasim, or Chastim, as they're saying it here, right? And we don't know if that goes back to a person. We do know there's a person who's related to the sons of Shem, who progenitors of Assyrians, you know, a lot of these Babylonians, you know, we saw Chaldeans. He would be an usually bold spirit who would venture to settle the problem that because Shinar, Chaldea, Aram Naharam, Mesopotamia have a like meaning, therefore they are all one place in the east, all right? So only because they had the same meaning, they're saying that was the same place. A Celtic etymology for Shinar would be as near, perhaps nearer, the truth. All right, so what does Shinar mean in Celtic? All right, that's interesting. For instance, Shinar might mean in Irish a tract of an old country, from Shin, old, and Ara, a tract of country, Aralan, Ura, Ar. This is not altogether an etymological venture to suit the present purpose. Proper consideration of the old European, Irish, British, and other Celtic remains will at least make us reject the explanation of the word through the Hebrew. Elam and Ashur are no doubt in that part of Asia. Now remember, Elam is a son of Shem, Ashur is a son of Shem. We verified this last time on the King James Version Bible. Ashur as the progenitor of the Assyrians, and Elam, these are both sons of Shem, right, is the progenitor of the Persians. Aram of the Aramites. So Aram, right, Aram, Lud, and the Lydians. So again, Elam and Ashur, no doubt in that part of Asia. now called Mesopotamia. The descendants of Nergal or Nimrod, with their distinctive Cushite marks, are there. But the sons of Shem, Arphaxad, all right, the sons of Arphaxad, Shelah, Eber, Peleg, Nahor, Terah, and the sons of Ham, Cush, Canaan, and Dedan, are to be found with the Japhetians. Example, the Gomerians, right? Remember the Sumerians, the Gomerians, Magogians, the Ashkenazians, the Ashkenazis from Japhet, the Riphatians, and the Elishanians, the Elishan people, and those of Tarshish, and to have left particular traces of themselves in Great Britain and Ireland. In Armorica, and I remember I told you about Armorica. In Armorica, they're not talking about America, right? This is actually in a part of France, you know, region. It says in other parts of France, Armorica, where they spoke Armorican, which is related to the Gaelic, Armorican, Armorica. In other parts of France, Armorica, Armorica. And in Spain, indeed, throughout Europe, far more than are to be found in Asia. Therefore, Shinar, we must claim to be nothing less than Europe. The reader who follows us will, it is hoped, be assisted to decide in favor of the old Celtic Europe, which may be described as one gigantic archaic deposit in which antiquarians, ethnologists, and philologists are quarrying with the most hopeful results. The peoples and kingdoms referred to in the Bible and supposed by commentators to be in the East are actually to be found in the West. Listen to this. They are not to be found in the East or over there where they're talking about Middle East or Iraq. It shall be our efforts to show that not only the Celtic tongues and literatures, but the histories of distinct nations point all in the one direction, that the materials of modern science are daily contributing to the proof of prehistoric Europe being the seat of many places and people mentioned in Holy Writ. All right, prehistoric Europe. All right, it's all connecting, and it's connecting to ancient Amaruca over here. Trust me. All right, that's why we're learning this right now, and that's why I'm reading this, because it's about to get really deep. All right, we will strive to remove the anomaly that because there is a small district in Asia, less than Ireland, by 9,000 square miles, nearly surrounded by two rivers, that therefore Shinar, Chaldea, and Aram Naharam, Babylon, Mesopotamia, and a host of other important places must have been there, we will bring to bear more direct evidence in support of our position, which we hope our readers will remember is Shinar being Europe, all right? Europe is Shinar, or summer. Europe could not possibly situated round about a Babylon that was nearer an island, nor a part of one in the east. And we continue in the book Ireland, or Ur of the Chaldees by Anna Wilkes, 1873. And we're in chapter 4. It says here, Chaldea is in Western Europe, reference to the religion of the Chaldees. So here, the first Chaldean was Arphaxad. All right, remember we broke this down. Again, who's Arphaxad? Arphaxad is the son of Shem. Remember we in our last video, Josephus also stated that the Chaldeans were now called that, but they were actually descendants of Arphaxad or Arphaxadites. All right, because they come out of him, whether it's through Nahor, right? Whether it's through Nahor, which became an ancestor of Abraham, which because Nahor had a son named Chesedek, right? We do know that in the Bible, but they're now telling us that Arphaxad might have a son named Chesedek. So, you know, either or, they're both coming out of the same line of Arphaxad. It might be some confusion there that we're gonna solve, you know. But going back to what they're telling you, again, the first Chaldean was Arphaxad. All right, the first Chaldean was Arphaxad. All right, this is the same progenitor of Eber. All right, the same progenitor of Abraham and all the Hebrews and Israelites. Arphaxad, this is the son of Shem. He was the first Chaldean. The religion of the early Chaldean shepherds must have been that of Noah and his sons. All right, the Chaldean religion, so-called, must have affected the Hebrew up to the time as well as after the sons of Noah became Chaldean and Hebrew. Megalithic altars and sacrifice by fire and prayer were signs of faith. The remains of the great Chaldean nation can be particularly distinguished in Great Britain and Ireland, and these remains have special reference to the religion of the Chaldean and the Hebrew. The signification of the word Calne, which was a place that the same as Calno of Chaldea, will assist to illustrate this. The first part of the word Calne or Cal is sometimes varied into Kyle or Gal and Seal, Gil, Gal, each of which mean in Irish to burn, to burn. It has no meaning in Hebrew more significant of fire. All right, now remember Celtic was how Abraham in Arabic scripture went through the fire in Chaldea, went through the fire to burn, to burn. That's actually a Celtic word. This is deep correlation. This is another angle that this author's probably not even going to include, but all the Arab brothers know what I'm talking about. All right, and now the word Chaldu or Celtic is like Celtic, Celtic. Oh, you know, sometimes my metonymy, the same word means a stone altar. A stone altar to burn. You got burned in a stone altar, which is sufficiently indicative of sacrifice by fire and smoke. Sacrifice by fire and smoke, just like Abraham went through in the Quran. Now, on the position we would establish as to the affinity of the Semitic and Aryan languages, the Hebrew nearly representing the one, as the Celtic may be said to almost represent the other. And because of their affinity, we will look into the Hebrew for the other portion of the word kalne. And accordingly, we discover that na or ne, as in Jeremiah 23, means a pleasant habitation or a house, ne. So a burning, pleasant place, Karne, or an altar of stone that's sacrificed, a pleasant place, or a house, as in Jeremiah 9, it says here 10, 25, 37, and in Psalms, and you guys can break that down. So the word kalne may be taken to signify the house. Example, people who sacrifice by fire. People, the house, this surname, these people who are sacrificed by fire. Or according to Gesenius, the ne or nai may come of Arabic and mean to shine, or denoting excellence, greatness, beauty. To say the word means to shine is not so figurative as what may be understood from the three words following it, for the reason that it nearly expresses the principal quality of kal, or fire, that is to burn. Kalne probably was the origin of the words Chaldea. If we take it apart from Art Chazdim, its name in Hebrew, we have only to account for the affix daea, and it becomes intelligible. Then it daea be interpreted as the beneficent or God of the Irish and not the generally understood. We will avoid much of the ridiculous uncertainty presented to us in the rendering of the word through the Hebrew. For instance, Chaldea is given by Calmet as daemons, or as robbers, or breast, or fields, from shed, shaded, shada, and ki. There is no doubt of the word having its proper meaning in the Irish, for is God in that language. So kal and daea mean the fire or altar of the God. The word kalne is still preserved in the present English as the name of a borough, market town, and parish, Calne, in Wiltshire. All right, they still have the name there. We find that Cal is prefixed to many other names of places and families, such as Caldar, north, south, east, and west, Calder, or Cader, the Calder stones near Liverpool, Calder Bridge, Calder Abbey, Cumberland, and the river known by that name in the same place. It is also found in the word Kirkcaldy, which may originally have meant a place of the church of the Chaldea. Beside Calne, we have Akkad, right, or Akkadian. The Akkad of Genesis 10 is another of the beginnings of Nimrod's kingdom. That there are many places called Akkad on this side of Europe, we see once by referring to the topography of Ireland, where there are numerous names of ecclesiastical foundations compounded of this word, Akkadi, Dagan, St. Dagon, and Waterford, like Dagon, like the Dogon people in Africa, Dogon, like corn. That's corn, grain. And Waterford, Akarur, Freshford and Kilkenny, Akkad Garabing, and other names for Dungun, Waterford, Akkad Kawin, the gentle Akkad, and another name for Ankondri, Sligo, besides many others. The word is used more extensively in Ireland if we take it in its corrupted form of Agar, a field. Agerdruim is rendered the field of the Druid. The Orcuds or Orkneys, as they are now spelled, is another example of the word, which seems to point, however strange it may appear, to the Okad or fair of the Arabs, the holy gathering for the singing of golden verses. We have in Okad and the Akkad the word Kad, which means in Celtic and Hebrew and Arabic, holy, holy. The Akkad of Genesis, no doubt, refers to an Akkad that is to be found, not to an Akkad that has puzzled scholars determined to make an eastern locus for it. And where should we look for Akkad but to the place that gives us so many examples of the name? Because Joktan, leading the Arabs over Europe, was contemporary with the Celtic-speaking people. All right, Joktan? And there was not time for Arabic to have taken the form of a distinct language. It wasn't there yet. So the Arabs preserved many Celtic significations and many legends, customs, and religious rites. What is called Arab tradition is often corroborative of Celtic tradition as well as Old Testament history. Kader Idris, to the Arab signifies the holy place of Enoch. That's correct. Did you know Idris was Enoch? And Muslim in the Quran. Strange this should be the name of a mountain in the Principality of Wales. Kader Idris, right? That's the name of the place. The Arab history of Ad and Tamud, Hud, Salah, those who dwelt at Al-Ras, and the inhabitants of the wood near Midian, is singularly enough drawn from traditions preserved in the verses of the Okkads, bearing an almost perfect resemblance to the triads of the Druids. The Okkads or holy fields suggest the idea of religious teaching. The Akkad of Genesis is not only one of the beginnings of Nimrod's kingdom, for from it, as an institution, arose the Akkadas of Ireland, the Okkads of Arabia, the academies of Greece. Academy, you hear that? That's so deep right here. How near this bears upon the Cadmus, who is said to have introduced letters into Greece, is better seen when we consider that the Phoenician alphabet had, like the Old Irish, but 16 letters. The Saxon Genesis, generally supposed to have been written by Cadman, should, we are inclined to think, be understood as simply the beginning. This will appear when it is remembered that Cadman is the initial word of the book of Genesis in the Chaldee paraphrase of Targum of Onkelos. Cadman or Kadmon, the B is merely prefix, which is a literal translation of Ra Bakshint in principio, the initial word of the original Hebrew text. It may be hardly necessary to observe that the Jews quote and call the first book of the Bible Bereshit. The books are denominated according to their initial letters. The Chaldaic Genesis, even to the present day, is quoted and called by the Jews Bikadmin. As an adjective, may be translated Eastern, as it is from the root Kedim, right? Remember Kedim, one of the sons, the East. A secondary meaning some of the words derived from this root have when they signify beginning or commencement, as much as to express that light, the sun, and day come from the East. And we continue in the book Ireland, or Ur of the Chaldees by Anna Wilkes from 1873. We're still in chapter 4. And it says here, the religion of Great Britain and Ireland was Druidism. And what was Druidism? The worship of one god by sacrifice on unhinged stone altars after the custom of Noah. So what is Druidism, all right? It says here the Druids preserved the religion of Noah. There were 3 orders of the Druids. They were called by their people Ek Draeth, which word is yet in the Celtic dialect. The Draeth being pronounced nearly the same as Druid, the Druid, all right? The Ur-Bruides of the Irish, as may be gathered from Nennius and others, were the same as the Druids and Bards of the Welsh, all right? These were all the same people. The 3 orders were the High Priest, or Chief Druid, who wore white, the Bard, blue, the Ovati, green. Green was the holy color of the Okad of the Arabs and was carried by them in remembrance of Al-Ras and Irem, the country, according to the Quran. All right, listen to that. What? The Irem or Ireland, Irem, Al-Ras and Irem, Al-Ras and Irem, Ireland, Irem, the country according to the Quran, from which they came. That's where they came from, Ireland. The bancors or stone circles were the places where the white priests assembled for sacrifice and song. The word bancor is made up of the Irish ban and white and cob, kora, a choir. So ban is understood in the word albion, signifying the land of the white cliffs. The ancient Britain, Ireland, had a name with a similar meaning, Banba, the white mantles of the shepherd kings, who were priests, have been always held as signs of purity. Hence, the modern priests and the choristers are arrayed in white. The Chassidim or Asidain or Asadai, other names for the people of Chaldea, have given us a clue to the Essenians, no doubt the same as the Asidains, who it will be shown were afterwards represented by the Chaldees. The Essenians are given as Asdanim in Mach. Says here 7:13. Josephus, Philo, Pliny, and others commend the manner of living of the Essenians. After their captivity, the members of the Jewish church divided into Chassidim, who superadded the constitutions and traditions of their elders, and the Sadikim, or righteous, who observed only the written law of Moses. The Chassidim were the Chassidians or Asidians, the Hebrew hef. The cha in English is expressed in Greek, sometimes by an aspirate, in Latin by an h, or it may be that it is sometimes entirely omitted as in Asidians. Let us now turn our attention to the erek or arak. Erek or arak, in Greek, pex or pex, pek, it is said to mean length or what lengthens, otherwise health, physic. From Areka, the supposed eastern city of Erek. Ptolemy places under the name Araka, near where the Tigris and Euphrates meet in Susiana. If the word is considered in connection with the Areka of Amianus, the place of the Arectine fields, abounding in naphtha, and as a consequence subject to take fire, we then refer its meaning to the first part of Arak or Erek, substituting for the Hebrew Ur or Ar, fire or light, Uruk. What are we forced to draw from this? Simply that Ur in Irish, as well as Kal, signifies that which burns, Ur, fire, Ur, that the Hebrew and Irish languages reciprocate many of their words is as true as that of the people who once spoke Hebrew had a common origin with those called Celts, first by the Greeks, who were nearly innocent of who the Gadhals or Gauls were, all right, and were of their country. Even the time of Pythagoras, who nevertheless has acknowledged he was taught much of his philosophy by one of their country, the Druid Abaris. This fact has had the advantage of special authentication, and if we are to see anything in it, it is that there was a high state of civilization and learning in the land of Abaris, while the philosophy and learning of Greece was as yet unsystematized, right? So there's an older, right, people here than these Greeks, right? And it's people only striving to know how to perpetuate their glory. The Gauls, the Gael, had one disadvantage in directly establishing in the minds of the Greeks the knowledge of his learning and civil greatness, and that was that his country was distant and without, as far as we judge, a rival nation to dispute its dominancy in the West. Whereas the growing ambition of Rome, situated near to Greece in her zenith, acted for a time to encourage her military and aggrandizing efforts until at last Greece was to an extent absorbed. But meantime, the Romans received the refining influence of her learning and arts and assisted more than can be correctly estimated to spread the knowledge of her greatness as their arms extended throughout the west of Europe. After a time, Christianity made its way, and the learning of the fathers, having had to operate more or less upon the pagan beliefs of Greece and Rome, while doing so, necessarily handed down to the modern biblicist and classicist the full growth of Greek and Roman insight and teaching, which of course included the little known of their origin. They didn't know. It never, as we have said before, entered the minds of the Greeks, nor did it enter the Roman mind, that the elements of their languages as well as their blood might be proved to have originated with a people in whose land are monuments as wonderful, as old as the Cyclopean structures of Greece and Rome, and whose religion, full of beauty, mystery, and philosophy, lingers yet in the mind and heart, not only of the Hebrew and the Catholic, but the Mahometan and the modern Greek. It will not require much to convince the impartial investigator that if Ur has the same meaning in Irish as in Hebrew, the word, as it was applied, must in some way be attached to whatever commemorates the old faith. We use it purposely in the singular of those people, and as our means of proving them as having been identical is forthcoming, we will for the present turn from erect to the place that has bewildered antiquarians and scholars in their search for it. We mean Ur, or Ur of the Chaldees. So we continue in the book Ireland, Ur of the Chaldees by Anna Wilkes from 1873. And we're in chapter 5 now. And it says here, Ur of the Chaldees, reference to Ireland as Ur. Having we considered fully introduced the question that Chaldea was in the west of Europe, although we have only given our reasons, in part, for so placing it, it becomes necessary to refer here, in connection with Ur, to an old Bible personage of importance, the grandson of Arphaxad, Eber, or Heber, all right? Now remember, we all know who Eber, supposedly all the Hebrews come out of Eber, Heberu, he who separated himself, and a descendant of Arphaxad, again, Arphaxad. There is found in Irish tradition a Heber whose name was given to Ireland, Eber, and which is to be perceived in the word Hibernia, Eber. Whether the Bible Eber or Heber and the Heber of Irish history may be the same does not concern us so much as the fact that Ireland has preserved to the present time more distinct marks of the ancient Ur that can be pointed to in any other country, whether or Asia or Europe. All right, he's letting you know that there's more correlations found in Ireland than in any other country, whether that's in Asia or Europe, of ancient Ur. It's found more in Ireland. Besides Ireland having had once the name of Hibernia from Eber, there are names derived of Heber in England and Scotland. In Scotland, the Hebrides. In England, the old name of York, Eboricum or Hebericum. It may appear as the argument unfolds itself that the balance of proof will rest on the side of the Irish Hebrew, having been a veritable Hebrew. A stronghold of the Hebrew was Iberia, a name under which Spain was once known. A great deal of the mystery that surrounds Hebrew may be cleared away when we remember our teaching that the scripture Hebrew was Chaldean first and then Hebrew, and afterwards Israelite, and that it is recorded that Milesius, the father of Heber of Ireland, came with his son out of Iberia into Ireland. Iberia and Tarshish are acknowledged by most of our recent Bible commentators to be one place, and that is Spain. All right, you see that? It is told to us, all right, in this Bible verse right here, I believe Psalms, in the prayer of David for his son Solomon, that the kings of Tarshish and of the Isles shall bring presents. There is good testimony in this of the prosperity of Iberia. We think the position of Tarshish out of the east brings many other supposed eastern places with it westward. The allusion to the kings of the Isles of the sea carries also significance, probably meaning the British Isles. All right, that's the British Isles. They're letting you know, the Isles of the sea. Remains of the old Iberian Spain may be said to be present in the designation of Celtiberia, and no doubt Galatia. All right, remember Portugal, the Gauls, the port of the Gauls, Galatia, Celtiberia or Iberia. Continues, says, whether we can reconcile the two Hebrews to have been one and the same person is, as we have said before, of little consequence in considering Ur of the Chaldees, Ireland. The first mention made of Ur is in Genesis, says here, 11:28, and Haran died before his father Terah in the land of his nativity, and Ur of the Chaldees. The next reference is in 31st verse of the same chapter, as follows, and Terah took Abram his son, and Lot the son of Haran his son's son, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went forth with them from Ur of the Chaldees to go into the land of Canaan, and they came unto Haran and dwelt there. All right, so literally they're letting you know that Bible verse that they're telling you straight up that Abraham was in Chaldea or Ur, right? And then he ended up in Canaan. So he was coming out of Ur, right? It is to be understood that we interpret the foregoing passages as meaning that Terah belonged to Ur as we place it and went eastward to Canaan. The district called Haran no doubt received this name through Terah in remembrance of his son Haran, who died in Ur. It is possible that there was a country or district of Haran in Ireland at that time of Terah's departure, or subsequently, for there are names of places there and near there that have withstood the wear and tear of time and remind us of Haran. They will be alluded to in another place. When Eber entered Ireland, he was welcomed by the company of Druids and ladies of the race and name of Lugaid or Lud. All right, the brother of Arphishad. All right, so who was these Druids? Of the race and name of Lugad or Lud. I remember Shem. He had a son named Lud. All right, so these same Lud became Lydians eventually. Lydians, but we're seeing here, there are also some of these ancient Druids that were there. All right. And brother of Arphishad. All right, a brother of Arphishad. So this wouldn't be a Chaldean when we're talking about a descendant of Arphishad, right? So these are not Chaldeans, these Druids from Lud, all right? The Ludites are described in Nennius as a great rolling wave, and their descendants are known in the British Islands by the comparatively modern names of Lloyd, all right? Lloyd, Luard, and Ludon, Ludon in Wales and Ireland, all right? Again, from Lud, who's also a descendant of Shem, a son of Shem, but not the same line of the Hebrews, because that was from Arphishad, all right? Still related, Macleod, all right, Macleod, or sons of Lud in Scotland. This race of Lud extended over a considerable portion of Western Europe. The old name of lions was Lugdunum, all right, Lugdunensis, that of Normandy, Mainlud, near Loch Maria Ker in Armorica. Armorica is a place that is remarkable for its megalithic remains, sculptured with the same kind of characters found on stones in several parts of Ireland. Then we have Ludlow, Ludwig, Ludborough, Ludenfoot, Ludgate, and the old name for the city of London, Carlud. Carlud, city of London, comes from what? Lud. All right, a son of Shem from Lud. All right, you guys overstanding that? All right, empty your cup, which is that of one of the three seats of the arch druids of Britain. And it says here in the footnote, Carlud was London, Card Evroc, York, and Card Leon, which yet retains its name, is in Monmouthshire. It says, perhaps one of the oldest customs on record is the annual tribute to Her Majesty the Queen of 20 pounds in gold from Aberfru, Anglicia, levied by Lud. All right, levied by who? Lud, who is said to have been the arch-druid or the king and founder of London. Lud, the founder of London. In the footnote, it says about 1008 years BC, all right, the city of London, it is recorded by Geoffrey of Monmouth and others, was rebuilt and renamed Lud after the destruction of Caer Troite, which is supposed by some to have been built on the site of the present London. All right, this is some drop right here. Although the account is interesting, we can only give it here in an abbreviated form. The King of London shall be entitled to 3 tributes: a tribute of gold from Aberfru, amounting to 20 pounds, a tribute in honey from Dinevor, amounted to 4 tons, and a tribute of oatmeal from Powys Winya, 4 tons. All right. It is not known to us when the tribute of honey from Dinevor was discontinued, nor when the oatmeal from Powys Winya ceased to be carried to London. But this we can say, that even as late as last year, the tribute of gold was collected by Her Majesty's agent of Woods and Forests, now residing at Carnarvon. All right. So remember, this was written in 1873. She was still taking the gold. They're like, hey, they didn't get rid of that. They still taking the gold. All right. The Dinevor above referred to is still in existence, and no doubt can be identified as the Din Haba of Genesis 36:22, and Chronicles 1:43. If Ireland was Ur, we must show some analogy between its druidical religion and that of Genesis. First, then, in order to clear the way for the introduction of more detailed matter illustrative of the people, antiquities, and literature of Ireland and its primitive faith, we present to our readers' judgment a view of what is written about the principal, at least the most conspicuous monuments of Ireland and their connection with pre-Christian belief. There we mean the round towers. The substance of what is taught about these towers is that they may be African or Phoenician towers, or towers of Persian or Chaldean magi. I remember Persians come from Elam, sons of Shem, and remember Chaldean is just from Arphaxad, also sons of Shem. All right, magi or magician astrologers, right? That is to say, they may have been towers for celestial observation, sorcerers' towers, fire towers of a restored Zoroastrian faith, or they may have been, according to the incredulous patriot, structures erected by the side of Christian churches. We give a passage from the learned Dr. Lanigan, who, although quoted by Patriot with great respect, is left steering a safe middle course between Mr. Patriot's skepticism and General Valenci's fanciful learning. Dr. Lanigan says, the great similarity of those towers in the interior of Hindustan to our Irish round towers has convinced me that this mode of architecture was introduced into Ireland in the times of paganism. The pattern from which the construction of our towers was imitated were most probably the first temples of the Persians and others who followed the magician religion as reformed by Zerdusht, or as he is usually called, Zoroastres. All right, Zoroastres. All right, the Persians. Remember, the Persians are descendants of Elam. Elam is a son of Shem. Let's go back to the chart again. Elam. Let's go zoom in. Elam, son of Shem. All right, the progenitor of the Persians. You see, and also Cyrus, Ahasuerus, who goes Xerxes. All right, Xerxes. Who's Xerxes? All right, remember. Who's these people? Darius, again, connecting to Zoroastres. Those temples were usually round and some of them were raised to a great height. That fire was in a pagan times an object of worship, or at least great veneration in Ireland. All right, and particularly the sun, which was considered the greatest of all fires, is an indubitable fact. Now, the lower part of an Irish round tower might have answered very well for a temple, that is, a place in which was an altar, on which the sacred fire was preserved, while the middle floors could have served as habitations for the persons employed in watching it. The highest part of the tower was an observatory, intended for celestial observations, and I think evidently appears from the four windows being placed directly opposite the four cardinal points. The veneration in which the pagan Irish held the heavenly bodies, and especially the sun, must have led them to apply to astronomical pursuits, which were necessary also for determining the length of their years, the solstitial and equinoctial times, and the precise periods of their annual festivals. I find it stated that the doors of most of these towers face the west. If this be correct, it will add an argument to show that they contain fire temples for the magicians. Always advance from the west side to worship the fire, According to this hypothesis, the round towers existed in Ireland before churches were built. I see no reason to deny that they did, and the particular style of their construction shows that they are very ancient. But then it is said, how does it happen that they are usually found near old churches? In the first place, this is not universally true. Secondly, it is to be observed that these towers used to be built in towns or villages of some note, such in fact as required churches in Christian times. Thus, wherever there was a round tower, a church was afterwards erected, but not vice versa. Whereas there were thousands of churches in Ireland without any such towers in the vicinity of them. Thirdly, there was a prudential motive for the teachers of Christian faith to build churches near the site of the round towers, that they might thereby attract their new converts to worship the true God in the very places where they had been in the practice of worshiping the sun and fire. It may be that some of those towers were built after the establishment of Christianity in Ireland for penitential purposes, as already alluded to, although I have some doubts about it. But I think it can scarcely be doubted that the original models, according to which they were constructed, belong to the times of paganism, and that the singular style of architecture which we observe in them was brought from the East, between which and this country it is certain that there was an intercourse at a very ancient period of time. There can be no doubt that the towers in the interior of Hindustan bear more than a striking likeness to those remaining in Ireland. These resemblances are to be found in such great quantities in the latter place that it is impossible but to believe Ireland was the center from which a great deal of the religion of Buddha developed. This will not appear strange when we consider, in connection with the point, that many of the saints of Ireland bear Aryan and Semitic names. So thus we have Saint Dagon, which is Dagon, the god of the Philistines. And remember, we got Dagon, or in Africa, the Dogon people, right? And in Celtic, Saint Dagon. We got Saint Moloch, the idol Moloch. All right, look, it's the same thing. All right, it's the same thing. Saint Diul, or devil in Irish, Diul. Saint Satan, Satan the destroyer. Saint Cronon, or Kronos the Titan. Saint Vulcan, the Vulcan of mythology, Vulcan, that's from the Mayas, right? Saint Ciaran, or Chiron, the centaur. Saint Nisan, or Nessus the centaur. Saint Declan, or Declan, the god of generation, Irish. Saint Luan, or Luan, the moon, Luan, remember Luan, the moon? You got that some, I believe, also in the Malachi York teachings. Saint Dererka, the Dire Irsi, the oak of the ark. Saint Dermaid, or Dermaidi, the branch of the oak. Kenny says of these names, and referring to many others that could be quoted here, did our space permit, in my opinion, all these names can be traced to heathen derivations, and there are many besides which are only Latinized modifications. Much of the ancient literature of Ireland was destroyed by early Christians, all right? Christians, remember what they did in America too, the so-called Christians. And it says in the footnote, real quick, I came to it, it says St. Patrick caused more than 180 volumes of ancient Irish theology to be burned. All right, what were they really burning? You see, what were they really burning? The St. Patrick, same guy who also kicked out the so-called snakes, right? They found it necessary in many cases to preserve to the Christianized Irish the names of many of the gods and heroes of their forefathers. If not, how are we to account for the inheritance of such names of saints as given above? But there are hundreds of the kind peculiar to Ireland. We must agree with Dr. Lanigan that the pagan Irish venerated the sun and heavenly bodies so much that they must have been well practiced in astronomical pursuits, and so determined the length of their years, the solstitial and equinoctial times, and the exact periods of their annual festivals. As to there having been intercourses between the East and Ireland at a very ancient period of time, there cannot be the slightest doubt but that the patterns of the towers were brought from the East westward through Europe and into Ireland is more than we are prepared to believe on the authority of those who have preferred to find the birth of archaism anywhere but in Europe. Why are there not among the hundreds of millions of people of the East who should be supposed to have preserved some such fire towers, monuments of their primitive faith? Such reminders of it are to be found in Ireland. The thousands of miles of country and continent they traveled over in Europe and Asia must have to an extent dissipated their original belief, just as the new context they experienced must have exercised their intelligence, accelerated by different temperatures, exigencies of living. To the unprejudiced scholar and thinker, not necessarily the man who has studied the languages, antiquities, comparative mythology of Europe, the Celt has left an eternal register of his occupancy there, corresponding beyond doubt with the Shinar of the Bible, and consequently the Chaldea and Ur of that book. All right, the Celt. All right. Beside the numerous round towers of Ireland, there are quantities of stone remains there that must have originated with the people of Genesis. These stone remains have often particular reference to the Assyrian and Egyptian periods, and will be found to have great value in showing how Christianity has retained, often without our knowing, many of the emblems and forms of faith distinctly traceable to a prehistoric but certain Aryan and Semitic and Hamitic source. Just as the Irish language has the equivalents of hundreds of its words in Sanskrit, Hebrew, Arabic, and other languages until lately believed to have had no affinity with one another. And of course, no affinity with Irish. All right, they still teach us that. In like manner, they would have been thought dreamers who, in a less enlightened age than the present, proposed to show that the origin of many of the Ninevite, Babylonian, and Egyptian monuments is referable to Western Europe. All right, Western Europe. Brian Keane, Hislop, and others called the early stone remains of Europe Kushite, but they may be proven to have had their origin principally with the posterity of Shem and Japhet. Shem and Japhet in Western Europe, all right, who must have been the first inhabitants of Europe, as not only their monuments testify, but the names thereof places and people to the present day. Many architectural stone ornaments of Nineveh, India, and Egypt, even in some cases the ancient American architectural stone ornaments, have in some cases exact resemblance to those found in Ireland. Even the ones in America, Ireland. The symbols of the archaic kings, prophets, and priests were, as a matter of course, remembered by the people and reproduced by them wherever they went. This will account for modification in form as it does for the relationship of the symbols. Noah, for instance, was recollected in connection with the deluge, and consequently after a time was venerated as the fish god Dagon. Alright? You hearing that? Under the form of a fish, to be found on the cave and other stones of Scotland and Ireland, says resembling the Dagon of the Philistines and Babylonians. Alright, so Saint Dagon, remember? This symbol is also to be found in Egypt and in China. Perhaps of all the symbols that go to show an intimate connection between the Celt, the Hebrew, the Chaldean, none is more ancient and at the same time truthful than the cross. All right, the cross, commonly supposed to have taken its significance from Calvary. Remember, there is a Celtic cross, right? That this notion is erroneous, the next few pages will show. All right, so before we leave today, I just wanted to read real quick from this book. We're going to get into this book a lot. All right, both volumes. I've been holding these books too for a while. And this one's called Ancient and Modern Britons. This is volume 1. A lot of you guys already know this. This is written by David McRitchie. All right, Ancient and Modern Britons. And just to correlate, we're in chapter 2 real quick. It says here the Jews, the Phoenicians, and the Chaldees are all stated to have visited our islands at various periods and perhaps to have colonized them. They're talking about the British Islands. All right, that includes Ireland. All right, they're saying Chaldees went there, but he, is deeper than that. It is the delight of one school of Gaelic writers to discover many affinities between the Hebrew and Gaelic tongues, and assuredly to a mere layman these resemblances seem distinct and unmistakable. The Irish name for the golden gorget of the Druids, the Jadhan Moraine or Tarhan Moraine, is identical with the Chaldee name for Urim or Tumim. In short, continues Governor Pownall, Early Irish Antiquities, Archaeologia, Volume 7, my friend the Rabbi Haydick will have it that none but Jews or Chaldees, all right, none but Jews or Chaldees or the people of Shem or Chaldeans could have brought the name and the thing to Ireland. All right, the name Ireland, Chaldees, Ireland, to mean Jadhan Moraine. All right, when Martin visited the island of St. Kilda last century, he made the statement that the ancient Hebrew measure of omer and cubit continues to be used in this isle. And whatever the fact, may be worth. The emblem known as Solomon's seal has been found by Scottish antiquaries upon many a sculptured stone. There seems little doubt that the Phoenicians at any rate were here. They indeed appear to have been as great navigators as the British ever were. They are said to have crossed the Atlantic and planted a settlement in Florida, all right? Or were they actually coming from Florida? Again, just wanted to correlate real quick. Again, none but the Jews or Chaldees could have brought the name and the thing to Ireland. Chaldean, Ireland, another source, more correlation. When we really start researching, it's actually all over the place. We're not done with the investigation. Again, this is just part one. We're going to continue. All right, I'll see you soon. To be continued. Wow.